Hey, how's it going everyone? My name is Kelvin Soa and welcome to the video. So this video is going to be an introductory video of the React library. So we're going to talk about the core concepts of React and I'll slowly demonstrate how React is a lot better than building web applications in good old vanilla JavaScript. So first of all, what is React? So React is a JavaScript library that helps us build our front-end applications with ease. So in every web application, we have what we call the front end and the back end. So the front end is basically what the user sees anytime they visit a web application online somewhere. So the button the user clicks, the form the user fills, and basically everything the user sees. That's the front end of the web application. Then we have the back end. So the back end is where we are making some queries to an external database somewhere, storing the user's data and authenticating users in some form. So we'll be talking about the front end aspect of web application and how React makes building front end applications a lot easier. So first of all, I'll start to demonstrate how React is a lot better than writing your web applications in good old vanilla JavaScript. Now, vanilla JavaScript is widely used, but then React is a lot better. As from statistics, we can see that a lot more developers are using React to build their front end applications than basically using normal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So in this course, we need to have a little knowledge about HTML and CSS and a little knowledge of JavaScript. You don't have to be an expert, you just need to know a little of these technologies. So let's start out. I'll build a simple counter app to demonstrate this, how we can actually do this in vanilla and also do that same thing in React. So first of all, let me create a div here, put a value in there, 0, and a button here and call it maybe count +1. Okay. Now what we want this simple app to do is that anytime I click the button, I want this 0 value we have here to increase. So by 1. So anytime I click this button, I want it to increase by 1. That's what I want our app to do. How can we do that? Well, we can do this with JavaScript. And to add JavaScript to our application, we can come down here and add a script tag here. And we can start writing our JavaScript code here. But to make it cleaner, I'll create an external JS file and add a source to it. So I'll call it app.js. So let me go ahead and create this new JS file called app.js. Okay. Now, before you can start adding JavaScript logics to your HTML, you need to make reference to every element in the HTML file in your JavaScript file. And to do this, you need to add identifications to each element that you are going to manipulate with JavaScript. So first of all, we want this 0 value we have here to change, right? So it means we need to do something with it in the JavaScript file. So let's give it an ID of say value, and then here we give it an ID of, let's say, increase. All right. So now that we have that, let's come in here and make reference to these elements we have in our HTML file. To do this, we do const what do we call it? Value. Okay. Const value equals document get element by ID. The ID we give it, which is value. Now we do the same thing for the second one, which is increase equals document or element get element by ID, and we give it the ID. Right. Now, before we can actually manipulate the elements we have in the HTML file. First of all, JavaScript doesn't understand the codes in the HTML file. And what is going to help JavaScript to actually manipulate it is something called the DOM. So the DOM is actually a short form for document object model. And just like the name is document object model, JavaScript doesn't understand the codes we have in the HTML file. So the DOM actually models those codes into a JavaScript object. Now, when this happens, JavaScript can now understand the HTML codes in an object form. Then we can easily manipulate the HTML document with other JavaScript logics. So basically, the DOM helps JavaScript to understand the HTML code and manipulate it to our liking. Yes. So first of all, if we want to achieve this, let's create a function. Let's create a function here and call it increment. Okay, and this increment here, first of all, we would have to add a state that will help change the value count we have here. We have to have a state that will help change the value count over here, so that anytime we click the button, it should affect that value, then reflect on the browser as well. So let's create a changeable variable called count, and let's initialize it to 0. So count is 0 for the first time. And then we say that anytime we call this function, we add +1 to it. All right. Okay. Now, in JavaScript, we have inbuilt functions that helps us to manipulate the DOM basically. So this increase here is a reference to this HTML button we have here. So we need to since we have the reference, we need to write some JavaScript logic to be able to do something anytime we click on that button. And to do this, we can just do increase add event listener. Then the events we want to add. So in this case, there are a number of events we can add here. We have click, we have close, composition, copy, like a lot. So depending on what you want, then you use it. So in our case, we just want to add the click event, right? So we can just add the click event. Then the next parameter is going to take is a function. So we can directly write the function here, or write the function somewhere else like we have here, and then we call the name of that function in here. So let me just copy the name of this function and put it in here. And what this line of code basically means is anytime we click this increase button, this function runs. So for instance, if we say on the click of the button, let's alert hello world. We come back here and click the button, which should be alerting hello world. Okay, let me refresh this page. All right, so now we are alerting hello world here after we click the button. So it means everything is working. Anytime we click the button, we are alerting hello world. Okay, now let's go back to what we want to achieve here. So we want to increase count by 1. So count plus plus will increase count by 1 every time we click the button. So let's log what count is and let's see if this is actually working. Count. Okay, so anytime we click the button, we want to add increase count by 1, and let's see if this is working in the console. So let's inspect here, check the console, and see if this is working. Okay. All right. So when you click the button, all right, so it's working. As you can see, count is increasing by 1. So anytime we click the button, it's increasing. Cool. Now, how can we make it affect the browser? How can we make it affect the state? So that anytime we click it, this 0 here changes to 1 and increases by 1 anytime we click the button. Okay, so what we can do is, here is where we manipulate the DOM. So we can say this value reference we have here from the HTML, which is this element we have here, the 0. We want to be changing values here. Okay, so how we can do this is value dot inner text equals count. Okay, equals count. So basically, after we have increased count by 1, we are setting the value to what count is. So if we increase count by 1, count now becomes 1. Then the value in the HTML text is now set to count, which will also then become 1. If we click the button again, the same process repeats. So it moves from 1 to 2. Then the value then changes in the HTML element and becomes 2. So we are basically manipulating the DOM by these events we've added in our JavaScript code. So now let's check and see if this is working. Okay, as you can see, if you click the button, it increases. Okay, cool. Now what if we want to add this same thing twice? We want to have this same counter application twice. Then it means we would have to duplicate our codes, right? And let me do that here. So we'd have to write same thing here. I will give it different IDs. So let me say value 2 and increase 2. Okay, and we do the same thing in the JavaScript library. Let me copy everything and then duplicate it. So let me change this to value 2, and then the ID we give it to the second one, and then increase 2. Same thing here, increase 2, and then count 2, increment 2, count 2, value 2 here, then increase 2 here. Okay, now you can check and see if it's also working. It's working for the first one, but the second one is not working for some reason. So let's see why. So we are saying that value 2 dot inner text equals to count 2. So as you can see, that's our first bug. We are making an error here because duplicating it is looking quite messy already. So now let's see if this is working. Okay, for the first one it is, and the second one is still not working. Let's see why. So value 2 dot inner text. Okay, let me refresh the page. Okay, so let's continue. And so just like that, we started getting some bugs here because the code is already getting messy. So let's check. Click on it. It's still affecting this one. Okay, so here it's supposed to be increment 2. Okay, so now this should work. All right, so now we have gotten 2 instances of the application. Now imagine if we want to actually get a lot more, maybe 50 or 100. Then you can imagine that this thing is about to get very messy very fast. So this is where React comes in. React can make this whole application a lot easier for us to build, and we can actually write the code once and reuse it across our application anywhere we want to. Okay, so now let's get started writing our React code. Now, there is a number of ways that we can actually start building applications in React. But the easiest way is to use something called Create React App. Now this Create React App will basically create the environment for us to start writing code in React. And to do this, we would have to install React in our command prompt or command shell. So let me open mine here and change the directory to desktop because I want the folder to be there. So to create your React app, we use this command npx create React app. Then you add the name of your project. So you can call it anything you want. So I'll call it React basics. And this will go ahead to install all the needed dependencies in our application. So as you can see, creating a new React app in this directory. So yes, before this can you can be before you can be able to install React, you need to have Node installed in your PC. And to install Node, let's head over to the browser, and in our browser just Google node.js.org to direct us to the Node.js page where we can download the Node software in our PC. So we have two versions here, which is the LTS version and the current version. Now it's highly recommended to use the LTS version as that is the stable version of Node. The current version is still in test mode. You can use that one, but then it might give you issues along the line. So it is strongly recommended to use the LTS version. So if you haven't installed Node, you would need to install Node to start writing React, because basically React is Node. Yes, doesn't mean that you need to understand Node before you can start writing React. It's good if you know Node, but then it's not exactly or necessarily a requirement to start writing React. All right, so let's see how we are doing here. Okay, still loading. Okay, so all right. So if you get after everything has installed successfully, you should get a message here say happy hacking. You see something like this, then it means you successfully installed React. Now let's change directory to the folder we've created, which is how do we even call it? React basics. React basics. Okay. Then after we change directory into that folder, and let me open that folder in VS Code by code dot. So code dot will open a new VS Code instance for us. Okay, so you can see that npx create React app has gone ahead to add these folders and files into the empty folder we created, or basically the project we are trying to build. So first of all, we have a folder here called node models. Now this folder has a massive number of folders, and just don't open it because you just keep scrolling and it will never end. So let's just close this because yeah. Now when we come to the public folder, we have some files here, but let's open this index.html file. And within this index.html file, we have our normal HTML that we know, the normal head tags, which it's meta tags and everything, the title. And on this line, we have this div here with an ID of fruit. And believe it or not, this will be the only code we need in this HTML file. We are not going to write anything in this HTML file. This is just it. And this is the only div element that we will need in this HTML file basically. And we are not going to write anything between them or something. We're just going to leave it as it is. And we can still write our React code, build our web applications, and everything will be successful. So yes, that's all for this public folder. The other files here are not really necessary because that is what it came along with create React app. Now we open this src folder. We also have different files here. Now let's check this index.js file. Okay, so in this index.js file, we can see some imports and some other codes here which looks gibberish to me. I don't know about you. But first of all, this thing looks familiar to me. Document.getElement by ID, because that's what we do in vanilla JavaScript, right? So basically, we are getting an element from the HTML file with an ID called root, and this ID is coming from this HTML file, this ID of root. So basically, we are making reference to this HTML element here in this index.js file. So basically, this document.getElement by ID of root is being referenced in this JS file. Now you can see here also React DOM.create root. So this React DOM here, basically, like I explained earlier, the DOM helps JavaScript to manipulate the HTML files or the document. That's the same thing happening here. So React DOM actually helps React to manipulate the HTML files and actually manipulate the HTML files to something that React can actually understand. Yes, that's what the React DOM is also performing here. And in here, we have some app components here that has been sandwiched between something here called React.strict mode. Don't worry about that thing. This app component here is actually a file we have here in the source folder, a file we have here called app.js. This app.js here. So when we open it, this is the code we have here. Yeah, we have some. This is a JavaScript file, and we are seeing some import statements and function and some HTML elements here. We'll talk more about them later along the line. So most of these files here, we wouldn't be needing them. We'll be deleting them soon. Okay, let's check this package.json file as well. This package.json basically stores the packages that we have installed in our React app. And if we check here, we can see that yes, React has been installed, and this is the version of React that we are using, 18.1.0, and the React DOM has also been installed as well. And Create React App also gives us some scripts that we can use, which is the start, build, test, and inject. This start basically helps us start our React application. So talking about start, let's just start our application and just too much talk about code, and let's see what we have here. So to start your React application, you open your terminal in VS Code, or if you're using the command shell, you can also do that there, but I prefer using the terminal that's in VS Code. To open it, I basically enter Ctrl+J to open the terminal for me. So to start the React application, just run npm run start. And this npm run start is coming from this scripting we have in the package.json file. It helps us start the application. Okay, so npm run start. Let's run this application. Or you can do npm run start or just npm start. Now this will go ahead and spin up our React application and it will start running. Okay, so just a second here. Starting the development server. Okay, so it's loading. Let's do this. Bring this here. Okay. Okay, so if you see a React logo, this React logo here spinning, and it basically means you have successfully started the React application and everything is working. So anytime you install a React app, this is what you should see. You install a React app, it's create React app. This is what you should see on the browser. Now we can just clean these things up because we don't need them. We just want to start afresh from scratch and understand what is actually happening. So we'll start getting some errors here, so don't worry too much about that. Let's delete this file because we don't need it. Test and this logo.svg, we don't need it as well. Import web vitals, we don't need it. Setup test, we don't need it. Okay, in the index.js, let's see what we have here. This strict mode here, we don't need it. The only thing it will be doing is giving us unnecessary warnings. Okay, let's get rid of everything here. And this one as well. Okay, so come back here in the app.js. We don't actually need this um, logo thing, and yeah, let's get rid of everything here. All right, cool. So now everything should work now. Okay, good. So we've cleared all the unnecessary files we don't need, and yeah. So let me just test this thing out. H1 and see hello world. should read. Okay, good. So in React, anytime any changes you make on your app, it automatically reloads and um, brings the updates on the browser. So to me, I think this is a very cool environment for me to develop in. Okay. So first of, you might be asking, how are we able to write this HTML files, these HTML elements in a JavaScript file? Well, this is not actually HTML, even though it looks exactly like HTML, right? But then it's not HTML, it's called JSX. It's called JSX. That is what JavaScript understands in React, right? But then Java, if we write this thing just like that in JavaScript, JavaScript wouldn't understand this, right? But then in React, there is a transpiler called Babel. There is something called Babel that is in React that actually converts this um, JSX into a JavaScript code that React or the JavaScript can understand, right? Because we are in a JS file, so we need to write JavaScript codes. This thing doesn't look like JavaScript to me. So there should be a method or a technology working somewhere that is actually converting this JSX codes to JavaScript. And yes, that is what is happening in React. And I'm going to demonstrate this in a bit. So if we have maybe a UL element here and an LI, a list item here of maybe let's see Pentil and let's see Vera and Baba, something like this. We have something like this, but you can see all these changes are also reflecting on the browser here as well. So JavaScript is not actually understanding this thing. It is Babel converting these codes to JavaScript codes that that JavaScript can understand. So let me copy this code here and take it to Babel and let's see what will happen. So let's go to our browser and check Babel and click this link, Babel, the compiler for next generation JavaScript. And in the nav, let's click try it out. Then the code we copied from our code, let's just paste it here. So this is a div class app UL blah blah blah. So this is our JSX code basically. Now if you write this JSX code, Babel actually converts this JSX codes into JavaScript code. So ignore the comments here. Just focus on the codes. This is just what happens anytime we write JSX codes. This is what's happening in the background. This thing we have here is converted to this piece of code here. So react.create element div. So that's this div here. This code creates an element called div with a class name of app. And then we create another element, react.create element ul, nor react.create element li with the value Beto, Vera, and Baba. So this is how it actually works in React. React takes all the complexities involved in writing these JSX codes in the JavaScript file and makes it simple for us to be able to work with what we are more familiar with, which is the JSX, right? So this is what actually happens in React. You write the JSX codes and Babel actually converts these JSX codes to something that React can understand. Yeah, basically that's how it works. Okay. And now you can notice here that this then means that our JavaScript file and our JSX are tightly linked, which helps us to easily manipulate the DOM, right? We can easily add files, add variables into our JSX. Let me demonstrate this here. So in our app function we have here, let me create a variable called const and call it name equals in Kelvin. Now I want to add this variable to this list item here. I can easily do this by creating something here and adding a curly braces here, putting the name of the variable we have here called name, copy it here and place it here. Now it should reflect here. Good. So now we are seeing it here. So this is how easy we can actually manipulate the DOM with our JavaScript. So if we were to do this in vanilla, then we would have to make reference to every single element in the HTML, right? We need to give this thing here an ID, this div an ID, this UL, we give it an ID, each list item, we give it an ID. Then we make reference in the JavaScript, then we start working with it. But then in React, it has been made so easy for us that we can just basically create this variable and use it directly in our HTML, our JavaScript file rather. So to add a variable, you need to use these curly braces and put in the name of the variable for it to work. All right, good. Now let's get back to our little application, our counter application we were doing in the vanilla JavaScript. Okay, so first of all, let's create and put in the 0 like we did, and then button and call it count plus 1. All right, so this is here. So our goal here is the same. Anytime we click the button, this value should increase. Yes, that's our goal. So let's go ahead and create our function called increment, and then in this function, let's first of all create our state, or the value that we want to change anytime we click the button. So let's just say let value. Now I'm using let because we want the value to change. So the value to change, we must use let. If we use const, the value won't be able to change because const doesn't allow you to reassign a variable. It is only let. So when we use let, then it means we can reassign the values. That's why I'm using let for this case. So let value equals 0 at first. I'm saying that in this increment, value plus plus, right? So anytime this function is called, I want to increment the value, and then here. So now that we are changing the value for value, yes, we can put it in our JSX directly and do something like this. That's a variable, so we can just put in our curly braces, then the name of the value here. So let's add the onClick event here, add the method we have here, which is increment. All right, cool. So now anytime we click the button, this value should update, right? Okay. Oh, so as you can see, it's not updating, right? It's not changing on the browser. Let's see if it's actually the value for value is actually changing. So let's log out what value actually is anytime the button is clicked. Let's inspect this. Okay, we have an error here. All right. So in the console, anytime we click this button, this count plus 1 button, we want this value here to increase. Let's see if it's happening. All right, so it's actually happening. As you can see in the console, it's happening. The value is increasing, but then it is not affecting the state of the application. It's not affecting the state. We are increasing the value. We've added the value in our JSX. So technically this should work, right? But then it's not affecting the state. This is because in React, manipulating the DOM, right, is an expensive operation because it deals with your computer's power and your memory and other stuff. So React needs you to explicitly tell it that, hey, affect the state of my application anytime this happens, right? You need to explicitly tell React to affect the state of the application. This is where I introduce you to React hooks. There is a number there are a number of React hooks out there that we can use. We have the use state, we have the use effects, use ref, context API, among others. But then what we need right now in our case is just the React use state hook. So before you can use it, you will need to import it. So in React, if you want to use a file, an external file or an external model, you will have to import it in that file you are building in. So we need to import React use states. So when we installed the React with Create React app, it comes along with all these hooks and utilities that we can use. So let's just import it. Um, use it from React. So we are importing use state from React. Okay. So first of all, let's log out what use state actually is. So use state, and let me give it an initial value of say example. All right. Now when we check here, we can see that this use state we are logging out here, it's actually an array, right? It's actually an array of two elements. First thing is the variable or the value we have, the initial value we added, which is the example, right? That's the element in index 0 of that array of use states. That's the initial value we have here called example. And then the second value in index 1 is actually a function, right? It's a function. Now this function here is what is actually going to change the state. It is going to change the state in our browser. That's what this function in the use state is going to help us to do, right? So to do this, create a let's create um a use state instance. So const an array, call it count. Let me just use what Copilot is giving me here. So const count, set count equals use state. So we are setting the initial state to be 0. You can make it 5 or 56 or anything. Basically means that where the use state value should start from, or the default state. So let's just start it from 0, and this is the value for count, and then the function that is setting count to a new value. Now, so let me clear this because we don't need it. So in the function, we need to make some changes. Value is not defined as, obviously. So now we need to set count to something else. We need to set count to be able to increase the value of count anytime the button is clicked, right? So this count here has an initial value of 0. That's what this means. So if I say let count is equal to 0, it basically let's count equals 0. It basically means in the use state value here that this count this count is equal to this value we have here. So this thing count equals 0 is the same as this line here, but then just count equals 0. This function is what is going to help us reassign counts to another value. But initially, if you want to reassign counts in normal JavaScript, you would just do count equals maybe 6, something else, and it will work. But then in React, it doesn't work that way. If you want to affect the state, you need to use the use state hook and use it to manipulate the state, right? So to increase the count value, we need to set count to an increased value, right? So that's where we use the count function. So let's do set count to count plus 1, right? So now we are setting count to a new value anytime we click this button. Now this value is not defined. So we would need to use the new value for count, which is this use state value here. Control C, and we place it here. Good. So now we are now using the value of count and resetting the state in this increment function. So we would have to change this value here to count, and yeah, now everything should work. When we click the button, the state should be updated. All right, cool. As you can see, the state is being updated. When we click on it, everything is working fine and everyone is happy, right? So let me go through what we just did again. We are saying that we are basically initializing a state here, or let me see a variable, right? A variable. We are declaring a variable or a use state, a state instance here. And this is how we do it. Const, it's an array of two elements. The first one is the value that we need, The second one is a function that actually reassigns the value we need, right? And we give it an initial value of what we want. We can make this null, we can make this undefined, but we are using zero, right? You can use an initial value of any value you want, basically. Then in the function, we are reassigning the value for count to something else. So we are using this set count function from useState, right? We are setting count to count plus one. So we are setting count to count plus one and we are logging it out to see if it's actually working. Then in our JSX, we are putting the count value in our JSX element here. And then on the click of the button, we want to run this function. So that's what's basically happening here. And it's perfectly affecting the state. Okay, so if you want to have multiple instances of this simple counter app we have here, does it mean that then we would have to duplicate this page? Well, no. React makes it so simple for us to make or reuse our code, right? And we can make this thing or this counter a component, then we reuse it multiple times across our app, right? So in React, common practice is to actually create a folder in our SRC folder here, a new folder called components. Now, in our folder, this way we can add components into our application. So now we want to add a new component called counter, right? We want to add a new component called counter, and it's a JS file. So counter.js. Now in React, every component should start with a capital C. A capital letter should be capitalized. So in our case, we have to use the capital C for the counter.js because every component needs to be started with a capital letter, otherwise it won't work. Okay, so we've created this new component and let's just start up with this snippet here. So basically this is an extension I have installed in VS Code. It's called React ES7 snippets. This is it. This is how it looks like. If you also want to do that, you can install this extension called React ES7 snippets. Because in React, every component or file you create, you would have to type this code all the time. So if you have this simple snippet, you can just do RAFCE and this boilerplate just appears for you that you can simply use. So it reduces your work. All right. So in this component, let's copy what we have in our app.js here. Let's actually remove everything and put it in this counter.js file we have here. Come back here and copy everything here, or remove everything. Then in our counter.js, we come here in the counter component and paste everything here. And then, yeah, we don't need the use state again. Let's remove it. Okay. So basically, now this import statement is not really needed. So basically, we are doing the same thing we did in the app.js, but just that this time we are making it a component separate from the global app, right? Because we want to make it a piece of our application. We don't just want it to be the whole application. It should be a piece for us to be able to use that piece anywhere we want in our application. So we have here this counter component, and in React we have the functional components and we have the class-based components, but I don't think class components is the future of React right now because developers worldwide are using functional based components. I'm not going to talk about the class based because you won't use it in the industry. You will probably not use it in the industry. Well, you might though, but then it won't be essential in most industries. So if you want to know more about class, you can read about it in the React documentation. So we'll be working with in functional based components right now. So to do this, we have created this function component called counter, and this is an arrow function, so it's an ES6 syntax in JavaScript. So this is the code we have here. We are returning this JSX component, and now we are exporting this component. So this export statement actually means that this component we have here, we are exporting it to be able to use it in different files. So if we don't export it, we can't use it anywhere. But because we've exported it, we can actually use it in our file. Now this is a default export, which means that when we are importing it, we don't have to put it in curly braces, and also we can also change the name as well. So let me demonstrate something here. So in this use state here thing we are using here, we are not importing use state. When you hover on it, you are seeing in it. That's because use state hasn't been defined here yet. So let me import this use state here. Import use state from React. Okay, so React exported use state as a named export, right? React actually we have two methods of exporting components. You can use the named export or the default export. So for the default export, when I importing a default export, we don't put it in curly braces like we have here. It's something like this. So I can just say React here. Yes, so something like this. React has been exported by default. So React has been exported by the default method. So when we are importing it, we don't need to add curly braces. But then use state was exported by React through the named export, right? So to import it, we will have to use the curly braces. So let me remove this one here because we don't need it. And then we have imported it. So now when we hover on use state, we can now see what use state is here. So it means we have successfully imported it and everything should be working now. Okay, so now we are exporting this component we have here. Why are we exporting it? Because we want to use it in other files, right? So now back to our app.js files. We've cleaned all the unnecessary files we don't need. So in the counter component, we can now use it here in our app.js. Let me just call the counter component. So now we have it here, but we would have to import it. Import counter. It's a default export, so I don't have to put it in curly braces. From then you make the reference to the path where it is. So this dot slash component slash then counter. You can write counter.js, but then there's no need to do that. So how this reference is that when you do dot slash, it means that within that particular directory this file is, which is the app.js is, we want to enter the components folder. So let me open the directory here. So this is app.js, right? And we are saying that dot slash, which means that within that folder that the app.js is, within that folder, that's the src folder, right? App.js is inside src folder. We are saying that within this src folder, we should enter the components folder, right? So this dot slash means the src folder because that's the folder in which app.js is. And then within that folder, let's enter the components folder, which is this components folder we have here. And within that components folder, let's use the counter.js component, right? So that's the counter thing we have here. We can add the .js, we can just ignore it, it will still work. Okay. So now we've imported it. So as we imported, you can now see that we have our components back again. Let me remove it and see that it's gone. It will go. It's gone. Now let's bring it back. Let's bring it back again. Then it will come back. Good. So now if we want to have multiple instances of this component, you can just duplicate it and it will just basically increase. All is independent of each other. You can use this one, you can use this one, you can use this one, you can do this, and everything is working. So that's how simple React can be if you are building applications in React. Imagine doing this in vanilla JavaScript. The number of lines of code you'd have to write before you can achieve something like this. You can just keep going, keep going. But then, what if we want each component here be different, to be unique, right? So when I click the first one, I want it to increment by not 1 but 5. The next one, I want it to increment by 10. I want the next one to increment by, say, 15. I want the next one to increment by 20, then so on. How can we achieve that? So back in our counter.js. So in React, there is something called props, right? Props helps us to build components that can be reused in our application. So to do that, within the counter components or the function call, within this bracket, we can just say props. Right. Now let's console.log what prop actually is. Let's do props. Let's see what props actually is. Let's inspect this. Okay. So, right, as you can see, we are getting an object, an empty object, right? So props is actually an object which is provided to us by React, but initially it's empty unless we add values to it. When we come back to the app.js and see increment value equals in curly braces, let's say 5, right? So anytime you use prop in a component and you want to give that prop a value, this is how you do it. Beside the name of the component, the name of the prop, then the value. Okay, so now the object is no longer empty. It has an element which is called increment value and 5, right? That's the first one. I can give the next one a prop value here. Let's say equal to, let's say, right? If we check in the prop in the log, you can now see that it now has another value called increment value with a value of 10. Good. Okay, so this what props is, but then how can we use it? How can props help us? So since prop is an object, right? Once again, here is like a basic thing you need to know in JavaScript, how objects work and stuff. So this is how we're going to use objects in React. So this props thing we have here is actually an object, and to make reference to the values in an object, we use the name of that object dot something, right? Dot the value, a value in that object. So here, instead of putting directly the count here, what we can do is put in props dot increment by, right? Props dot increment by. Let's see if they are the same. Okay, let me just change this. Increment by. Good. Now, as you can see, it's now affecting the state here. So these props can help us make our components dynamic. So basically what's happening here is that I've added this prop value, right? Let me remove this log. I've added this prop value, and instead of directly putting my count value here, I'm saying that this prop value should be, okay, let me just put the count here for now. So which means that this count thing here can be dynamic, right? We want to change it based on the value we are trying to set, right? Good. So what we can do here now is after we have set count to, let's okay, okay, so in this code, instead of increasing count by 1, you want to increase it by the value we want, the value we are passing through the props, right? We want to increase it by the value we are passing through the props here, as we have here in our app.js. Okay, where is it? Okay, so as we have it here, we want the values to increase by the we want the increment value to increase by the values we pass in as props here, right? So to do this, let's go back to our counter component, and then instead of putting in 1 here, it should be counter plus the props dot value, sorry, props dot increment by. So it means any value we add in here should be added to the count. So if suppose it was 5, it would then be 0, which is the count, plus 5. Anytime we click, it will be 0 plus 5, then 5 plus 5, then 10 plus 5, and so on. So on. Okay, so then we would have to do the same thing here in the app.js increments by, and put it here because something, let's see, 20, 20, and then increment by, let's see, 15. Okay, so in the counter, let's just make this a lot more descriptive. Okay, so let's make this counter plus, instead of plus one, let's do it plus prop dot increment by. So this will change the state we have here. Refresh the page. Oh, okay, localhost is down. Let me restart the server. npm and start. Okay, so I've just restarted the server, and now you can see that since we removed the count plus one here and place the count plus props dot increment, we now have count plus that value, that prop value, which is 5, count plus 10, count plus 20, count plus 15, and we can add the rest. Add here equals maybe 25. Do the same thing here. Let me just copy everything. Control C, Control V, and make this 50. Do the same thing here. Control V, make this 100 and 30, and so on. You get the gist, basically, hopefully. So yes, now as you can see, it is affecting the state. You have count plus 5, and when you click on it, it won't increase by 1 but by 5. So yes, 5, 10, 15, the same thing, plus 10, 10, 20, 30, just 20, 40, then we come to the 15, 30, then 25, 25, 50, 75, and so on, and so on. So now this basically how we can create components and reuse them across our application, right? But then we can still do a good job in cleaning up this code. We can make this look even better and readable. So let me just comment this out for now. And to do this, we can loop through an array of values, right? And assign these values to the prop thing we have here. We can use a for loop to achieve this, but I'll use a function that JavaScript provides for us called map that allows us to map two elements in an array. So if you have an array of maybe some values, say 1, 5, 35, 16, 34, 76, 89, 70, and 100, right? Now we have an array. Let me put them in this curly braces so we know it's a JavaScript code we are trying to write here in the JSX. Okay, so this is an array we have here. We want to map through this array. So we put this array map, right? And we make a reference to each element in this array. So let me call it value. And we need to have a key of index. So the index, then it follows another function. And this function, we now add a component, right? The counter component we added. Counter, yeah. So now we are basically mapping. So as you can see, as soon as I add the component, it has mapped through the components the number of times I have an element in this array. So if I have maybe 24, another one will be added here. Exactly. If I add maybe 16, another one will be added here. So now I want to make this thing dynamic so that it won't always be 0. It won't, yeah, it's giving me NaN because this value here hasn't been set. This prop, this NaN means not a number, means the value over there is not a number, right? Because in the counter.js, I'm not passing it any value yet. I'm not passing it any value yet because I'm saying that it should be this 0 plus some props dot increment by. I've not set it yet. We'll do that here in a second. So within the counter, I'm just going to say increment by, yeah, the same thing we did here, but then we are going to write it once. Increment by equals. Then instead of putting in the actual value, which is maybe 5 or 10 or 20 or anything, I'm just going to write value. And like I said earlier, this value here is making reference to every single element in this array, right? It's making a reference to every single element in this array. So value, and this should also take a key. Since you are mapping, it should take a key of the index. All right, great. So now, as you can see, everything has been updated. And we have the counter plus 1. This one is the one I have here, plus 5, which is the 5 I have in the second element in the array, plus 35, which is the third element in the array, plus 16, the fourth, plus 34, which is the fifth, and so on. So if I add another element here of another number here of say 32, it will come down here. Good, 32 counts plus 32. So if I click the first one, it will increment by 1. If I click, it will increment by 5. If I click, to increment by 35. If I click, it will increment by 16, 34, 76, 89, and so on. So basically, doing this, we have shortened our code from some number of lines to basically just 4 lines of code, which looks clean to me. I don't know about you. This looks very clean to me and readable. I can watch this code and read it and understand it, than maybe going through a vanilla JavaScript project that has been done with so much clutter and so much mess that it will take you a lot of time to actually understand vanilla code. If you are building a big project, right, in vanilla code, it's very difficult to read and understand the code. But then in React, it is made so simple that you can just refer to this counter component and see what is there. This short lines of code, you now understand that, okay, this counter component, this is what it's doing. And now we are making instances, we are creating duplicates of that component by mapping through this array, right? Okay, we can even make this a lot more cleaner. Let me remove this here and assign it to a variable, or let me see, values, right? I've not defined it yet. So let's say const values equals the array. It's just the same thing. So now, if I want to add new items or get another instance of the component, I just add a new value, 56. If you come down here, 56, it is working, it is supposed to be, it's incrementing by 56. Can add another one here and see 70. It will come down here, it will increment by 70. This looks so clean and readable that you can understand it very well. As we were doing in the vanilla JavaScript, just creating 2 instances of this component. We had to duplicate codes in our HTML and do the same thing in our JavaScript. So imagine doing it this number of times. How would that look? Just imagine how would that look in VS Code. It will be very difficult to understand, obviously. So yes, React make things this look a lot easier for us. Now there are a lot of things that we can still talk about in React, but I don't want this video to be very long, so I like to end here. I might create new videos to explain more concepts in React. So yes, I'll end this video here, and if you like what you've learned today and you want to know more, please like this video and subscribe and share. And you can comment your thoughts as well, so that I know maybe if you have a question, some questions, or maybe some additions you want to make, you can just add them in the comment section. I'll read them and reply them. And basically, yes, just that will keep me making this kind of videos and tutorials for you guys. So yes, please like and subscribe and share the video. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. And if you have made it this far, then congratulations, you are really crushing it and you'll be a good React developer. So thank you very much.